Okay, I'm going to get started and let other people kind of come in as we get started. So I just want to introduce you to the Institute of Design, otherwise known as ID. We're based here in Chicago at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Here at ID, we look at the world in new ways to create the change we hope to see in it. We were founded in 1937 by Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, and since then our goal has been to turn design into a powerful tool anyone can use. Our graduates use design to transform the systems that shape our lives, from cities, education, and finance to food, technology, in today's case, in healthcare. Today, we are the only U.S. design school devoted completely to graduate students, and we were the first in the U.S. to offer a PhD. We unite science and rigor with creativity and rapid iteration, and we're pioneers in applying design to the real world. Here, both learners and leaders observe the systems in our world in order to envision the new worlds they can build from them. We have an application deadline right now of March 3rd for our graduate program. So if you're interested in any of them, please go ahead and reach out. We have people on the chat today that can answer questions for you. And we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the hour today to answer any questions about, of course, today, the subject matter that we have to talk about today, as well as graduate programs, any other questions you might have about the Institute of Design. So today we're talking about healthcare and design with ID Associate Professor Tomoko Ichikawa, our alum, Sarah Braunstein, and our current student, Keval Parekh. And so what we're going to do to start out is I'm going to ask each of these folks to introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with you, Sarah, and just ask you to tell me how your last doctor visit went.
Sounds good. So hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Sarah Braunstein. I'm a senior product manager at Calderos, which is a health tech startup based here in Chicago. I completed the MDes plus foundation program in 2018. So spent 3 years with the Institute of Design. And so thinking about like my last doctor's visit and really like pretty much all doctor's visits, I think about the time period between like getting into the room and actually seeing either a nurse or a physician. I always feel a bit like, we're a captive audience during that time. I feel like often my cell phone doesn't work very well, probably the old brick buildings that we're in. And I start to just look around the room. And I think that this is like an opportunity for engagement that I haven't seen done really well yet. I'm primed to be like thinking about my health, ready to maybe engage in something with something. And usually what I see is stuff that's either like super technical, or it's meant for the provider, or it's maybe like cheesy, kind of like inspirational, but doesn't have a lot of like information for me. So that's the thing that I have like found to be consistent in all of my provider visits. And then I think I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Keval.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone who's attending today. I'm Keval, and I am a second-year graduate student at ID. I'm similar to Sarah. I am also part of the MDes and Foundation program, and this is my 4th semester. Speaking about my last visit to the doctor, which was, I think, a couple of months ago when I was in India, I think it was pretty straightforward. Everything kind of went well, and I really love my doctor because they are so kind and they answer my questions sort of patiently, because that's something I kind of look forward to and expect when I am, visiting a doctor regarding health concerns. So yeah, I'm gonna pass it to Tomoko.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. Thank you for attending today. My name is Tomoko Ichikawa, and I'm an associate professor here at the Institute of Design. My area of specialty is in visual communications. The last doctor visit I had is less about physical experience and more about the relational aspect of my relationship with my doctor. She's a relatively new doctor to me, a little bit younger than myself, but I, in the university setting, am afforded the status of being a professor. But when I go out into the world and I encounter different people, I'm always conscious of how they might be thinking of me. I am a small-statured Asian woman with gray hair. And, you know, there's a power dynamic that happens when you're with a doctor and you're there for different reasons. She doesn't know who I am personally. She doesn't know that I teach at a university, et cetera. So, you know, when I ask questions, you know, is she going to answer with respect and, you know, treating me as an individual, or is she just going to brush me off as another patient? Those are the kinds of things that are in the back of my mind when I encounter people in different domains with different authority levels who do not know me personally. With that, though, I'm going to transition and talk about our project today. I have the pleasure of doing so, and I'm going to share my screen with you. Oops, sorry. We've been doing this for so many years now, and I'm still getting it wrong. Hold on just a second. What I wanted to do was talk to you about this project that I have been engaged in for about 6 years now. And it is a discussion guide that was prompted by a radiation oncology doctor at the University of Chicago by the name of Dr. Dan Golden. He's been with us for the 6 years. And he wanted to know, you know, is there an easy way to teach patients about radiation treatment? Everyone seems to think it's the same thing. There's a lot of misconceptions around it. It's difficult to understand. It's a black box. People are afraid when they come to engage with me. If we can make graphic narrative-based, comic style-based instructions for people who are on the plane, right, for emergency measures, could we do something like that for radiation oncology? And so I was introduced to Dr. Golden through my colleague, Kim Irwin, who is also at the Institute of Design, and she is one of the leaders of the Action Labs here. And so this project actually started in 2017. Hopefully you can see my screen. Over the years, we've made multiple versions of this discussion guide. The idea is that it's to communicate an external beam radiation experience. So in radiation therapy, there's two different kinds. We focused on this first and foremost. This is the part that Sarah was participated in. The second set of discussion guides talked about brachytherapy, which is an internal type of radiation. That happened 2 years later. And then in 2020, during the summer, with graduate students Jason Romano and Grace Hanford, we created tumor site specific guides. One of the feedback that we got from our first version was that it was too general, and that that doctors weren't able to answer very specific questions based on what kind of tumor they had. So we decided to tackle that and create some tumor-specific guides. The first summer we created three, one around breast, lung, and prostate cancers. And then 2 years later, last summer, we created another set of three, and this is the one that Keval and Mayuki Chacham, another MDes student, participated in creating. So the foundation was laid in the first discussion guide, and then these others became an extension. So now we have a total of 10 discussion guides. Let's see if I can. We had funding from two different sources. One was from the University of Medicine's Bucksbaum Institute for Clinical Excellence for the first two projects. And then the last two was by the Radiation Oncology Institute. And this netted into 10 discussion guides total, 7 of them which are have been translated into Spanish. The last 3 is, as we speak, being translated. They're all open source and Creative Commons licensed, so people can download them for free and revise them as they wish, modify them. We had 2 funding sources. 9 academic papers were published out of this, and a total of 21 ID students were involved. And just to give you a sense of what that's like, the idea is that it is an 11 by 17 trifold, and I think Keval has actually a live version, so he can show that to you. It opens up, and one can walk through the different phases of the radiation treatment process all the way to after treatment. So this is giving you an idea of the base format. We have a total of 7 different versions for the external beam radiation treatment process. So that's sort of an overview of the project. Because I'm sharing, I cannot see my script. So sorry, I'm going to have to stop sharing in just a second.
Well, Tomoko, maybe you can just tell us a little bit, like, you've been working in design for a number of years now. I mean, how did you imagine that you'd be working in healthcare at some point, and how did that happen?
That's a great question. I've been in practice for over 15 years in design itself, and that was all in commercial related experiences. I was at Dublin, which is a boutique consulting firm, now a partner in Deloitte Digital. I think at some point, we understand that design has been sort of understood for the commercial world, and by working in the healthcare field or other systems-based areas where there are complexities and where there are tons of user improvement opportunities, it is gratifying. I did not think that I would be in healthcare. Maybe the only thing that I've done in healthcare that was commercially related was an insurance company that I worked for as a consultant. But I think there are, as design has shifted as a field from going from commercial endeavors to more social impact type of projects, it's not just healthcare, financial literacy, education, anywhere where people encounter large problems and large experiences that, where they feel very small, right, as individuals. And there's a lot of things that we run into the system. That's always an opportunity for design to step in.
Sarah and Keval, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about your experience working on this project at ID and what made it interesting to you.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually remember, like, during my foundation year at the Institute of Design, when these healthcare projects they'd already started, but were really kind of gaining steam at ID. And it was, for me, just a bit of a reminder of like, oh yeah, that's why I'm here. Like, that's really the work I want to do. I am from a family of providers, and I was kind of on that track earlier in my education career before I took a sharp left into liberal arts. And so I think it's really cool and exciting to kind of like come back around and make an impact on, patient experience, provider experience, but from like this different angle. And yeah, like working on the team for the SEBRA project, so that the work that started in 2017, I was really kind of part of the core design research capability for that team. So I really helped kind of like lead the development of the discussion guides that we brought into conversations and interviews with patients and caregivers, as well as providers and like technical folks who are on site involved in these treatment sessions day to day. And we really, were focused on understanding what that experience was like, what kinds of questions and concerns people had, what, some of the more like nuanced technical detail that you could actually start to communicate visually that is like maybe harder to do in text-based form. And then there were other folks on the team who were, illustrators. So those were the folks who were actually able to explore style and different levels of detail, color, focusing on key frames through the process. And then there were people who were more like integrators. So the people who could maybe like take some of the key insights from the research and translate that into the artifact that would support patients and help kind of like iterate and refine on that and get feedback along the way. So it was a super collaborative but structured team where everyone kind of like had their area of focus or expertise.
Yeah, I would also like to add on that. I feel it's very interesting because we learn so many different kinds of design methods here at ID, and to be able to, implement them and have an impact through design, and especially like in a high anxiety and kind of a life-changing situation like cancer, that felt really empowering to me when I was working on this project.
Can you talk a little bit about your role in the project, Keval? I think, and Sarah, remind me, what was your undergraduate degree in? It sounds like you were in foundation, so it was maybe a non-design.
Yeah, that's right. I was an English literature major.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And so
Yeah, so
Right.
sorry. So as Tomoko mentioned, I was part of the latest version of CBRE Guides, which focused on digestive system, head and neck, and brain cancers. So I was working with Mayuki, who is a final year MDes student at ID, and I also come from a non-design background. I've studied engineering, and my role during the project was of a design researcher and a visual designer. So
Great. And how did you feel about, and especially, you know, given maybe you can talk a little bit about your current role today, Sarah, but how did you feel about like the impact that this work was, you know, making or positioned to make in the world?
Yeah. So I think like Keval said, you know, what is more kind of like gratifying or important than helping someone through this very kind of like high stress, challenging time in their life. So I think like I was gratified by to be able to participate in that experience and have that impact. I think it kind of like shocked me and my family to know that like I have my name on a peer-reviewed journal article. Like that's not something that I necessarily expected when I joined the Institute of Design, but is certainly like really, really cool. And yeah, I think I did this project with Tomoko. I also worked closely with Kim Irwin on a handful of different projects as well. And that's like really where I was the most excited about taking my design career as well after the Institute of Design. So I joined Dublin for a couple of years, was largely focused in the healthcare practice. So did a lot of work with, you know, that's a huge vertical, includes, you know, like pharmaceutical manufacturers, health insurers, actual providers and health systems. And so I was able to work on projects where we continue to examine the patient experience for all different kinds of, you know, disease states or life stages, and thinking about how those clients can really reimagine their patient experience for the better. And so it's really kind of just been a continuation of the work that I did with Tomoko and with Kim at the Institute of Design through my professional career too.
That's fantastic. So and I think Tomoko, this project, and I think you alluded to this a bit earlier, is it took different shapes in terms of it was a workshop maybe once, and then faculty research another time. Could you talk a little bit about the different shapes it took?
Sure. So at the Institute of Design, we have different types of classes or courses. The original CBRE project in 2017 was actually a faculty research project, which means the students have to apply for the project and I have to approve them. And so in a way, I was able to create a dream team for this initial project. And we didn't know that it was going to be organically grown and developed and extended in this way when we first did that. But there was a lot of learning to be had, especially in relating with Dr. Golden and the way that he sort of rolled up his sleeves and worked with us. The subsequent class for the brachytherapy, the internal radiation class project, was an actual workshop. So that's a 14-week project. Students register for the class and they come to the class. It's not by permit. And so those students actually had what we had learned from the original CBRE project as a basis, and myself as a way to teach that, so that it could be done in a 14-week class. And then the subsequent extensions of the projects were done as a summer research project. So that was interesting in that we had 3 months of the summer to actually create 3 different versions. Luckily, we had some of the format and the visual language established already from the initial project so that we could extend and make it more specific. But in each of those versions, the summer projects, the extensions, you know, our students, they went and did research. They interviewed patients and caregivers and technicians and other clinicians, like Sarah had mentioned, just as we did for the first one, because we needed that information. The content differed for each one of those discussion guides. And so that was a little bit of a management complexity in terms of project management and who we spoke with. Some clinicians were able to, respond for all 3 different types of cancer sites. Others were more specialized. But I think the kind of classes, these extended 14-week classes or summer projects, are meant to cover from sort of the beginning of the let's go find out and understand and define what the project is, all the way to the actual making of the final output that has now been out and released into the world.
Can you tell me a little bit about why the kind of design, and you come from a communication design background, why the kind of design that folks learn at IED is well positioned to kind of partner with healthcare projects and healthcare challenges? And I know, for instance, that you have also worked with the National Academy of Medicine on this type of work. So maybe you could offer some examples of how and why design and healthcare can work so well together.
I think it's because, well, for twofold. At the Institute of Design, we're a graduate level class, a school. And so the students that come to this level of education bring, whether it's a non-design background or a design background, and have a level of maturity to understand. And I think the idea is that they understand that design is not, so for example, we're not a graphic, this is not I don't teach graphic design. So this is not about aesthetics. This is about the type of design that we work on here is to think about how it applies to the larger world. And so having a level of maturity and also having foundational students like Keval and Sarah who bring with them a perspective from a different field, I think also helps in the way that we can understand larger problems. We also focus here on the issues around systems and things that are complex, and think about ways of using things like communication design or product design or interaction design or the other types of design that we teach as a way to help demonstrate the projects that we encounter and move the ideas forward. So the goal isn't to make a beautiful brochure or a beautiful poster. It is very much about thinking, how do we use our design skills to help move the project along and the solutions along, the prototypes along, so that we could get to a larger goal.
Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about how you use design in your everyday work?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm now a product manager at Calderos. So product management is relatively new for me. I moved into this role. I've been with Calderos for about 2.5 years, moved into this role about like 6 or 8 months ago. And that was really when I determined that, I wanted an opportunity to go really deep on a particular like area of focus within the company, and really kind of be the owner of a particular product. So but a lot of that work is really just communicating complex concepts, and the space Calderos is in. So we focus on increasing transparency in the drug discount ecosystem in the United States. So pretty like specific niche focus, and a ton of complexity. You get into legislation that exists. You have a lot of different stakeholders that you have to engage with and think about how solutions are impacting them. And then you can get all the way into, workflows and how people are actually doing work day to day. So there's just a lot of things that I need to communicate outwardly. The particular product that I'm focused on is relatively nascent for my organization. And so it's also something that I'm doing a lot of like internal education on, like, why are we focused in this space? What's important about it? What do our stakeholders need to get done? And how is Calderos going to play a role in that? So I'm kind of like, I mentioned this to Tomoko, there's not a day or a week that goes by that I'm not thinking about the diagramming class I took with her, because I feel like I'm kind of always like have 5 Miro tabs open where I'm kind of like working and refining certain information flows, or things that I'll then kind of like refine and then share out to a broader group and get questions and feedback on. So it's really like this kind of idea of communication design is something that I'm really kind of like living in every day in my role.
And Keval, I don't know exactly where you are in terms of, where you're looking at to go next upon graduation and that sort of thing. Do you have ideas about that, or how you might use design in your own future?
Yeah, I would say I'm still exploring, but I am really interested in the experience design space, be it for digital or physical products, or even for solutions that go beyond the digital and kind of physical realm and into a more of a broader service focus area. So, and I've been, I would say I'm really grateful that I've been able to explore different kinds of work till now while being at ID, like visual communication, product design, interaction design, service design, and also I've been able to explore different kinds of industries like healthcare, and now energy and transport. So it has been really interesting. Yeah, and this all of this experience has like helped me learn a lot about being a designer.
So I think some of the terms that we keep coming back to and is that design is working in different industries, that these industries share some sort of complexity, and that they're working among one or more different systems. And so I wonder if someone could speak to just this idea of complexity in different systems and why design is situated to help leaders like Sarah and Keval, perform well at their current or future jobs, and in this particular moment, what's happening in these industries or in our culture that requires that.
I think I can speak to that a little bit, and Sarah and Kevo, please feel free to chime in. So what we try to do is take a step back and look at the big picture of things. We emphasize context a lot. And in order to understand where design might provide value, we have to understand the larger context and the way things are related to each other. And so we have methods that help our students go out and look at the world in different ways. And I try to think that what I teach is not anything agnostic to one particular industry, that the types of skills and competencies that the students get at the Institute of Design are transferable between different types of industries. We become user advocates. We become very strong proponents for thinking about things from the user's perspective, which a lot of times people in the industry have not. They look at it from their business perspective, or they look at it from a strategic perspective. And so the systems that we look at are big. We think about designers as different ways that we can contribute to changing them and improving them, because designers alone cannot do that. We also look at different kinds of interventions, whether it be to chip away and change the nature of the system so that it becomes better, or in some cases, there are Band-Aid solutions. Then they have to be the solutions that take care of the gaps that exist for right now, so that we can make experiences for the users smoother in the meantime, while there is work to be done to improve the system. And so, Sarah mentioned my diagramming class. We use visual language like diagrams as a way to sort of be able to think about abstract concepts, which is what complexity is often about. It's not necessarily the minute details, but it is also the big picture. And so through classes like diagramming, or Carlos Teixeira's workshops where he looks at systems, right? One of our required classes is around systems and systems theory. We try to get our students up to speed in terms of how one can approach a system, and how to break one down into smaller components, and to be able to focus or communicate or solve for the different requirements that are needed.
And so it seems like there's an interesting marriage between systems design and like human-centered design here, right? Because you're stepping back, as you said, to look at the big picture. But at the same time, as Keval and Sarah mentioned, they were, doing interviews with individual people to find out about their experiences and be able to design these for actual humans, right? So I wonder if you could, Sarah or Keval, talk a little bit about your experience actually, interviewing folks, and then, you know, how that sort of was realized in sort of the final results of the guides. Like how you take those interviews and kind of extrapolate them and bring them into the final product in some way, or even if, you know, in this project, or Sarah, if you're doing that, you know, elsewhere in your current role, or how this kind of, I'm just interested in how like you are working at a system level on the one hand, but also like on a very individual human level on the
Yeah, I think, oh, go ahead, Keval.
Okay, so I'm just gonna take one example that we during our project we were working on these three cancer sites, which is head and neck, brain, and digestive system, and we learned that these are very complex when it comes to treating them. So most of the times, the patients who are diagnosed with cancer in these areas have to go with kind of associated treatments wherein they are part of where they are have to go through the radiation therapy treatment along with chemotherapy or along with radiosurgery. So there was a lot of complexity involved when it came to the treatment timeline for all of these, and to be able to communicate that easily when it came to kind of covering that in this discussion guide. So we did that through, we had a section called My Information section, and that kind of covered, okay, for your radiation therapy treatment, you need these things that, these prerequisites that you need to do, and then differentiate that with sort of prerequisites or medical process specific information regarding chemotherapy that the patient is going through. So
I'm just quickly sharing my screen that has that My Information section. So the complexity can come from the experience itself. It may not be systemic, but the idea is for people, especially when you're engaged in something like this, where it's not like experiencing a restaurant. You don't want to go to this ever again, right? So this is rare, infrequent, high stakes, high stress. How do we get, and highly customized, which is something that we learned that our patients don't often know. They'll say, oh, my aunt had radiation, so that must be like hers. Each one of these radiation treatments takes weeks to personalize and make individual. And there are specific things that need to be jotted down for both the patient as well as the doctor. So we created a highly specialized sort of a form section on the back of the brochure. And it also acknowledges the fact that you may be taking other kinds of treatment in parallel, like chemotherapy or hormone therapy. So depending on the patient, right, the level of complexity increases because of the nature of their ailment.
Sarah, did you have anything to add there? We can move on to the next question.
I think all those points were amazing. I think what, Tomoko spoke about of like switching between kind of like the systems level thinking, and then also, a very specific kind of like human interaction that we're doing in these research activities. There's a lot of planning that goes into, before you enter a room with someone to do that research interview, where we're, trying to understand the entire journey and have hypotheses around those things. That's how we figure out, what questions we need to ask. We're doing research on site to like see the space and the rooms and talk to the providers, maybe before we ever engage with a patient, so that we can come into those moments with sensitivity, but also, be able to encourage patients to reflect with us on their experience and maybe think about things in a new way. And we also bring different sorts of like activities, for example, into those interviews too. So I remember one that we did where we kind of like had an individual map the different stakeholders that they have engaged with over the course of their treatment, and like how close they were to the patient with like the degree of interaction that they were having with that stakeholder, and like describing the nature of those interactions. Why did they engage with, someone at the front desk, and what was that relationship like versus the treatment, maybe the technical individual who was getting them set up day to day in the session. So I think when you say research interview, there's just so much that goes into the preparation and planning of it. And it was just pretty amazing to like get that hands-on, like real life experience through these projects at ID.
Tomoko, can you talk all about how the medical community has received this work and other work like it?
So these are sort of anecdotes that were coming in, drips and drabs, requests to Dr. Golden, because we have the attribution section, because this is a Creative Commons based license. I think you could see them on the bottom. And he was getting requests from other medical institutions like the Yale Cancer Center and others, asking if they could use it. And by all means, it's absolutely non-branded for an institution. We have actually little places where people can, institutions can print out their logo on an Avery label and stick them on so that they can make their own. There's a section in the My Information section that has specific phone numbers that you can call. So each institution could put in their own phone numbers for billing or when to call, where to call on the weekends. And they could stick their institution information. We've also been getting inquiries into different languages. And so we've had the first attempt to translate into Spanish. We've gotten requests to translate into Korean. If you go to Dr. Golden's website where you can download this, you can see a map. He tries to keep a current map of on Google Maps to show where all the downloads have happened. The downloads don't necessarily mean that they've actually been used, but at least it's in people's purview. And based on some of the research that's been done, perceived benefits studies that Dr. Golden's medical students have actually engaged in, those are what became publications. You'll see that it's a pretty favorable mechanism to communicate. What we have not been able to do yet, and we would really like to have funding to do, is to actually go talk to patients themselves to do a before and after. I know Dr. Golden is planning on doing a step wedge research survey in that sense, but it does take time and it takes money to do that. So we're looking for funding opportunities as well. We were also more recently we were approached by a pediatric radiation oncologist. I believe it was a radiation oncologist saying, "Can you do something for kids?" And so changing formats, like creating these into videos, right, or animations. I think that's totally possible. We have the digital assets already, but again, it's finding time to and the money to invest in a project like this.
That's great. Okay, well, I think what we'll do is people can start. I noticed there's a couple questions in the Q&A already. If you could put your questions in the Q&A itself rather than in the chat, that helps us so we can kind of keep track of what we've answered and that sort of thing. And so what I'm going to do is start going to the Q&A to get those questions. And the first one I see is from Lisa, who's asking if consideration has been given to translating this from a 2D experience to a 3D immersive experience. And I think you just answered that a little bit, right, Tomoko?
Yes, I saw that question. But yeah, I mean, AR, VR, exploring different mediums, I think is a fantastic thing to be able to do. You know, it's whatever gets the information to the people who need it the most in the fastest way. We've had also anecdotally, you know, and this type of radiation that folks are being subjected to tend to be for older patients. And we actually had somebody who used this and said, you know, I was showing this to my grandson, so he could know what I was going through. And being able to have it in a visual language that it's transgenerational, the fact that, and it's so beguilingly simple and non-threatening, I think is the key. So whatever medium that can be applied to, I think that'd be wonderful.
And then Thomas has a question. It looks like Thomas works at University of Chicago right now and is in clinical research and would be interested in learning more about the academic publications resulting from this project. You mentioned Dr. Golden's website. Is that the best place to visit for that, or?
That might be. I also recently created a Google Scholar profile. So if you look me up on Google Scholar, the publications are listed there as well.
And then we just have a new one. What are the top 3 areas beyond medical communication where such communication design projects can yield significant socioeconomic benefits? So beyond healthcare, the way I'm reading this is like, what are the other industries or areas that we can leverage?
I'm going to use language that may not be so appropriate in language in a setting like this, but I think anytime, and I've spoken to other students about this as well, but anytime there is a oh shit moment, right? Whether it's, you know, trying to figure out what am I supposed to do for retirement, or what am I supposed to do if I hit somebody with my car, right? These are, again, moments that we don't want to have to confound us with. Those are, anytime there's a gap like that, those are all opportunities for design. Whether it might be financial literacy, teaching kids how to take care of money, or tech literacy, right? Teaching kids how to behave appropriately online, to education, to, I mean, there's plethora of examples like that in the world.
Great. And then how did this work illuminate any, did it influence any changes in patient hospital service interaction? Were there any changes that came about in how doctors interact with patients as a result of this work?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure I have the answer for that. I do know, I think there is an attempt and a desire for doctors to be more compassionate and allow patients to have some empowerment in their decision-making process. So, you know, it'd be great to do a survey with the doctors that have downloaded this and have used this to see what might have changed in their practice and what might have changed in their approach to their patient interaction. We do not call this a patient education material. We don't just give it to the patient. The doctors actually, we recommend that the doctor, during the consultation, which is the first initial meeting that the doctor has with the patient, to walk them through this experience by way of this discussion guide. So it's called the discussion guide for a reason, so that the patients can be informed of what they're about to encounter. So rather than going into their experience blind. So I think being able to use this tool as a way to foster that kind of care, you know, design, we create interventions and things may have secondary impact, and that might be one of them. It's not just to educate the patient, but also to bring about that sense of care to that experience.
And so thinking about that sense of care, how did you think about care and the emotional quality of, like, when you were putting the illustrations together, and did you get any feedback about how the illustrations made folks feel, or just the information in general, not just the illustrations necessarily?
So I think the content primarily came from Dr. Golden's structure in his head about how he thought the phases of the treatment went. But I think some of the details in the discussion guide came from actually talking to patients and caregivers. So for example, there's a particular stage where it's the planning stage. Patients go to do what's called the simulation planning. And that's to sort of to give the doctors an idea of what it is that they're dealing with. And they use that data then to plan a particular treatment for the patient. And it takes about 1 to 2 weeks. The patients aren't really sure why they can't come into treatment right away. So we have to educate the patients to understand that, you know, it's because there's things happening in the background that's making the treatment very specialized for your particular case. And so we were able to find things that patients could do while they're waiting. They could get their insurance in order. They could have logistics being planned. The idea of helping patients not feel so powerless, even when they're not being in treatment, and the idea that they can do something as well. That was one of the things that we, I think, was uniquely coming out of the research. Another aspect of the discussion guides that we deliberately planned for was the diversity in terms of the staff members that were represented. So you'll see doctors of different gender and different ethnic backgrounds, as well as patients. And so we wanted to make sure that there was representation in what we were showing. Now, you know, granted, not every patient is going to see all 10, discussion guides to understand that variation, but there will be instances where, oh, that doctor is Asian, or oh, that doctor is African American. We wanted to make sure that that was a part of the variations that we represented.
The only thing I'd add is in early research interviews that we were doing, maybe we spent like the first half of the session in very like kind of open-ended questions about their experience. And then we would use the second half of the interview to like present kind of different options that we were exploring. So we really wanted to bring them into the process, let them know we were working on this discussion guide. And we had like 3 different versions of just like a subset of frames, essentially, in different styles. So different levels of detail, how realistic the individuals in the frames were versus kind of like not even reading entirely as people. They were more like shapes that you could infer were, yeah, here it is, exactly. So we started to kind of get feedback on like, okay, what are you taking from these? Which is the most clear? How do the facial expressions in these, are they conveying the right tone? Like getting feedback on all of those things so that we could make sure we were communicating the information that was needed, and doing so in a way that kind of felt right to the actual end users as well. So we learned, that like they actually wanted that detail because that's really important to like see what's going on. Like some of that more like ambiguous frame, the tone might be right, but like they can't actually tell like what it's going to feel like or what I'm going to have to do. And that additional detail in the illustration is what was needed to convey that.
Great. This might actually be a question for you as well, Sarah. If any work in the price transparency world or in medical billing / insurance, where you use design? I know you mentioned working like on pharmaceutical like discounts and that sort of thing. I'm not sure if this enters into your territory.
Yeah, so Calderos generally is focused on the drug discount ecosystem. So that, relates to how drug manufacturers price their drugs and then the different kind of like rebates and concessions that they're giving to different stakeholders. I'd be totally happy to talk more offline about what Calderos is doing and if there are any, specific questions about that. But yeah, I think, we have visual designers, product kind of UX, UI individuals on staff. We have other folks who went to the Institute of Design. Someone who's the director of culture at Calderos also graduated from the Institute of Design. So we kind of have like design woven into our DNA for sure.
And then Tomoko, can you talk about like getting funding for this project? And what that process was like? Was that through your partners mostly?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah. So it was. So the first 2 projects were through the University of Chicago's Bucksbaum Bucksbaum Institute of Clinical Excellence. I believe doctors at the University of Chicago apply for microgrants there that could sort of fund seed starting projects like this. And so after the first 2 projects, he, with the assistance of his medical fellow at the time, Dr. Ritu Araya, she was the one that created the proposal to submit to the Radiation Oncology Institute. So these are all Dr. Golden's connections. What's interesting is what we created in design became ingredients for scholarship for his students, for his medical students. So medical students are expected to write papers, they're expected to do studies. And so we were able to create this sort of fodder, the ingredients, the materials for Dr. Golden's students to be able to do that. And so writing, grant proposals for funding is something that medical students need to learn how to do. And so using our project as, so we were the beneficiaries actually, ultimately, of that type of engagement. It's really interesting because in design, we were always looking for the next project, but in medicine, right, when you get something like this that they're able to extend upon and leverage and use, it's a fantastic thing.
oops, this could go to anyone here. What do you see as the richest areas in healthcare to apply human-centered design? I think, Tomoko, you kind of, I liked your definition of like the oh shit moment. Those seem to be rich areas.
Yeah, I think so. It depends on who you're designing for. Are you designing for even the person at the front desk, or are you designing for the clinicians who are actually in the front lines treating patients who are not able to do things in the way that they ultimately, ideally, would like to do. So I think working with technologists, working with actually the people there to understand. But sometimes I think, looking at the outside world and thinking about what patients are actually going through, because ultimately, I think that, and like I said, I think there's a shift in the medical industry to be more user experience based, and that I mean, there's tons of opportunities in healthcare for that, right? From appointment setting to just having good interactions, or some of the things that Sarah had mentioned early on during, going to appointments. Wherever there is that gap of what is versus what could be, I think is the place where design can always work.
Wonderful. And then this next question from Rosanna gets to what are strengths or mindsets that good designers bring to the table? Can you talk about skill sets that good designers share? Anybody should be able to answer this question.
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in with some thoughts. I think that designers come with like a mindset of curiosity, asking questions, looking to understand. I think in where the different places I've worked, there's a lot of experts, which is amazing to have that resource to draw on. But coming in with kind of like a beginner's mindset to learn something fresh, it helps other people examine from all angles a challenge or an opportunity. I think that designers tend to be pretty flexible and adaptable. At the same time, when we're faced with really like complex, ambiguous challenges, we have processes and frameworks that we can follow. So where other folks might kind of be overwhelmed by something as big and complex, we're like, let me at it. Like that's where I'm going to thrive, because I know that I have tools in my toolbox that will help me kind of navigate this. So I think those are some of the things that I've seen that no matter where I work, I think will be strengths that I can lend to an organization.
Great. And then Sharon has a question, really interesting question about how you got physicians to trust you as experts in the first place, given that you don't necessarily have, medical experience yourselves.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of personal connections that are related to that. I mean, Dr. Golden has a network of colleagues that he works with that he was able to communicate with in terms of the value of this project, who also agreed and was on board with helping us out. I think in any type of large complex project like this, it's good to have somebody who's going to be a design ambassador. And I think of Dr. Golden as somebody who is a design ambassador. He understands the value of what we're doing, and he speaks their language. He has their connections. He is someone who is not just within the University of Chicago, but nationwide, worldwide, has connections. And so I think it's very valuable to find that person that's going to be your ambassador in the other organization to help you foster those relationships along and to do the introductions for you.
And then we have a great question too from Mayuki, who worked on this project, the most recent iteration of this project, to ask about how were you able to continue this project when under COVID?
So in 2020 summer, that's when we were shut down. It was, I mean, the things that were different were that we could not go do a physical site tour of the clinic itself. So Jason and Grace, who were the designers that summer, Dr. Golden actually took his phone and did a FaceTime with us, and he walked around the clinic and he showed us the different area. So it was virtual. The interviews we did not do in person as well, so we had to do that on Zoom. It was a little bit of a challenge technically as we were negotiating and trying to reach older, older patients. They were not equally technically skilled. Sometimes they would tell us that they know how to do Zoom, but it was actually FaceTime. And so they had to be very nimble. The researchers had to be very nimble and say, oh, let's do a phone interview instead, so that we could keep the appointments. So yeah, there were that type of thing, but being able to use digital whiteboards like Miro as a way to collaborate. We didn't have Miro when we did the first project. We used big boards against the wall and physically handled the data. But during lockdown, we were able to use things like Miro and spreadsheets to capture and be really tenacious about what they were finding and being able to record and translate what was being found and through the research so that it would make it into the final piece. But it was really helpful to have that original project as sort of a prototype and a template, both from a procedural point of view and as a design inspiration point of view, structurally, so that we could all work off of to do the subsequent projects.
Great. So we're gonna go ahead and end there. Thank you all for joining us today. This is a wonderful discussion. We will share the recording with you. It'll also go on our YouTube and our Vimeo channels. And you can find out more about this project at the links. We put a bunch of links in the chat today. So you can find more on our website. And if you're even just considering a degree program at ID, please feel free to reach out. We have wonderful people here who can answer your questions. And we have a deadline coming up on March 3rd. So now's the time to ask those questions. And thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.